Okay, I just wanted to do a video for a question I get asked quite often, is trying to explain why bespoke general joinery like doors, windows and stuff is so expensive, or seems to be expensive. There's a big cause for this, which people obviously, it's difficult for them to understand and see. Timber windows that we make and general joinery companies make are fully bespoke. So they are all made to suit each property that you're going into. They're not a generic window, so there's nothing wrong with a lot of the high street window companies that are out there, but they are generally generic windows, exactly the same profile, style, etc. And they are mass produced. Generally, a lot of them are abroad, but they are generally mass produced. But if they are in this country, then they're done on massive machines, and they are to a set style, set glazing, etc. Which makes them a lot more competitive than a bespoke joinery company like ourselves. We take each project as a one-off. So each project, whether it's just one casement to a whole batch of windows or doors or any general joinery, is all done as a one job, one setup and run through. So all the machines are set up and processed for that job. Nothing's preset. So just to give a sort of general overview, we have obviously all the timber comes in as a sawn stake. Sort of the sapele and the coir that's here. So that all comes in sawn timber. That timber is obviously then sorted through for whatever dimensions and sizes required for windows, whether that's casement windows or sliding sash windows. The process starts by, first thing is the cross cut behind me. Everything is cross cut to length and all the ends are trimmed to take any stones or debris that might have been picked up in transport, etc. So that's all then done to a cutting list. So obviously before we even start, we do have a cutting list to make. Once all it is all cut to length, the timber is then ripped to size through the rip saw. Again, that's just behind me, into the various widths that we need. In that process, obviously we have all extractions, obviously waste product from the saws and planers, etc. go into also extractor bags. And again, that's a time that we've got to allow for emptying extractor bags, keep tidy, keep the workshop tidy. Obviously, once all the timber's been ripped, the timber then goes through a four-sided planer, which planes the timber on all four sides, as a name, which is again this machine behind us here. Every piece of timber goes through that machine twice. So again, so every piece of timber already has been cut to length, ends are trimmed, so that's two processes, and then it goes through the rip saw, another process, and then through the four-sider, again, two processes. So already up to 5 processes before we've even started to make the joinery. So once we've actually got the timber into a planed section, which is all planed round, all smooth, square, straight, obviously we then have to go through the process of setting it out, marking out where our mortises and tenons, mouldings, etc. go. So again, that's another process that we have to do. Again, we will then start, before we start doing any tenoning, everything is cut to length for our items like the jambs and mullions, rails that need tenoning. They are then obviously mortised and tenoned. So the first process is on the mortiser, again, which is this machine. So all the, if it's a frame, top rail, top and bottoms or seals are mortised, and if it's obviously the casements, it's the stiles that are mortised and tenoned and haunched. So that's another process, so we've got already this piece of timber being handled multiple times already. Once we've done that, we then go on to a tenoning machine, which again is this machine behind me here. So again, each rail or mullion or jamb is tenoned on both ends. So again, each piece of timber has another 2 passes on that machine to do both ends. Then once that's done, we then work onto the spindle moulders. So we end up with the mouldings, rebates, grooves, depending on what it is. If it's just a general casement, then it's obviously just a mould and a rebate. But again, that's 2 more passes, so 1 moulding, 1 rebate. Once that process is all done and all the machining is done on the items, of frames obviously, actually going back to that on frames, obviously you've got a moulding, you've got an acromat groove or draft proofing groove, you've got a capillary groove, you've got a sealed groove, you've got the seal section. So on a frame, you have multiple passes through the spindle moulder. So this obviously takes a lot of time to process each piece of timber. So obviously more windows you do, obviously it's quicker it is, but obviously if you're doing a singular window or a single casement, the process is the same, but you've got that continual setup time to do. Once you actually got to that stage where all the machining's done, we then what we call into dry fit. So again, that varies. If it's a frame, you might have to do sort of either a scribe, or if you're doing or mitre on the frame for the mouldings, if we haven't been able to do it on the tenner. So everything is dry fit together, sizes are checked, making sure everything's in square. There's no issues with sizing, squareness, any issues on machining. So again, it's quality checking as we go through. So that process, quality checking, is going all the way through the process. Once it's dry fitted, obviously then we need to obviously take it all apart, sand all the inside edges. We then obviously screw and glue, or or glue and wedge if it's casements, screw and glue if it's frames, them all together. Again, making sure they're square, not entwined. Again, checking the quality, making sure the joints have gone up nicely. Once that's done, then again, it's through a finishing stage. So we then obviously sand the frames. Any minor filling can be done and sanded. Once that's done, again, the casements or doors will then be put into or hung into the frame. So that's cut the hinge, shoot the, when we say shoot, basically make the casement fit the frame with the nice margins. Obviously we then put the hinges, cut the hinges into the frame, cut the hinges into the casement of the door. We then, if it's a casement, we then fit the ironmongery, which is the stay and the fasten generally. If it's a door, then obviously it's locks, door knockers, any of that kind of handles, anything like that. So once you get to that stage, we've then got to a stage where everything has been basically manufactured, sanded and pre-fitted into the frame. Obviously, if everything, and generally everything of ours at minimum will go out in primer. We don't let anything go out unless it's in primer, just due to the conditions. But generally all our joinery goes out pre-finished. So once we now at that stage where everything is hung in the frames, whether again like at doors or casements, it is then all stripped down. So that means take the casements out of the frame, take the ironmongery back off it, store that, label it, store it so it all goes back onto the right window, right frame. Because anything like any ironmongery, it's always slightly different. So the best good process is to make sure everything's labelled up per window, per door, per frame, so it all goes back in the right holes, so when we reassemble it's fine. So that stage we then go back over everything, do a final sand and fill, and prep ready for paint and the finishing stage. As I've done on a different video, the obviously spraying is a 4-stage process. So we've done the initial sanding and filling and everything down in the joinery shop. We then do a first coat of primer, which is generally an anti-stain, which basically highlights any minor imperfections that might not be picked up on the joinery shop floor. Always though, minor hairline cracks, it just shows up as a black line. So that, once the first primer is done, we denib between the 2 coats. We then obviously go through and do any fine filling that's required. We then give it a second primer. We then wait that to go off. And obviously, once that's done, we again go back over everything, re-sand it ready for top coat again. Might have missed something, so again, it's quality check, go back over the joinery, make sure that everything's in good working order and doesn't require any more filling. If it does, it's not uncommon, because every time you look at a piece of joinery, again, that's where the quality comes in. Yeah, you just carry on doing a bit of fine filling. At that stage, you then do the first top coat, whether that's just white, colour, whatever. You then, some people only do 1 top coat, to depend on which paint system you're using. I always generally like to do 2 top coats. The second top coat for me is generally a sort of a lighter coat, just to give it that little extra, if there is any slight imperfections that might have, or coverage with the first top coat, I'd just like to give it a second top coat. Once that's done, obviously you've got to leave the joinery to cure, ideally for about a week. Not always possible, but ideally for a week, for it to sort of harden enough for you to handle again. Once it's cured, like I say, you can do the next stage earlier. You've just got to be much more careful. Obviously timescales and etc. sometimes dictate that you have to do it sooner. So again, once that joinery is then ready to be brought back down from the spray shop, we then go back through and put it all back together again. So put the draft excluders in, rehang the doors, put the hinges, obviously which means put the hinges back on, put the locks on, put the stays on, fasteners, depending if it's a door or casement. Check everything works, because there's nothing more annoying and frustrating for the fitters or the customer if you turn up and go, oh, that wants a little tweak, which sometimes happens when you put all the draft excluder back in the door, and obviously it's all new draft excluder. Sometimes the locks might get a bit tight, but that's very easy and simple to do minor adjustments in the workshop before it goes to site. It's better for the client because they don't feel like something's been changed on site because it doesn't work. But also it's easier for the fitters, and it's just quality control before the joinery goes out of the joinery shop. So again, so everything goes back on. So the doors or casements are back in the frames, and then from that point of view, the joinery is now ready for glazing if it has glass, or if it's ready for fitting. So again, if it needs glazing, depending on what type of glass it is, depending on what the finishing is, it can then be glazed in the joinery shop. Ideally, everything's glazed in the joinery shop again because you have that control, and it's generally better. There is times where a door and frame we've got at the moment, we need to fix through the side light, the fixed side light, to fix the frame properly. So that will have to be glazed on site, just purely for feasibility of fixing the frame properly on site. Otherwise you're cutting out plaster on the inside to put brackets and all sorts. So that's why the cost is where it is. Obviously, to run a joinery shop, gas and electric, maintenance, tool sharpening, blade replacements, etc. obviously are not cheap. We also have other issues like, we've got to get rid of the waste product sensibly, whether that's through recycling centres or however that might be. So that's why the cost is generally, there's a lot of time and a lot of process into making a window when they are fully bespoke in a handcrafted joinery shop like we are. And that's where the lead times also come from. Because of the way you go about it, the lead times are due to those many processes. And there is a time in between drying, between coats of paint. There's time for glazing. There's time for reassemble. And then obviously once you've done all of that, the joinery is ready to go to site. So again, that sometimes could need protection. So if we're not fitting it ourselves, or we're having to have it delivered by a third party, even if we are delivering it ourselves, we then have the time to either take the doors, etc. out the frame just due to weight limits, wrap up the joinery so it's protected in transit. So when it gets to the client has a non-damaged product. So that is very general overview of where sort of the time and costings come from to do general joinery, like doors, windows, and general, what I class as general joinery. But I hope that's sort of helpful and informative, and sort of explains why the costs come from and where the time frames come from. So again, I hope that's useful.